Welcome back, Forbidden Seekers. You're watching Forbidden Files, where ancient bones defy modern truths. Our story begins in 1928, on the arid southern coast of Peru. A local archaeologist, Julio Tello, was led by native farmers to a strange burial ground in the Paracas Peninsula. They called it sacred, untouched, cursed. What he unearthed would not only shake Peruvian archaeology, but the foundations of human origin theory itself. Dozens of bizarre, elongated skulls emerged from beneath the sand. At first glance, they resembled human skulls, but twice as long, with exaggerated volume and structures that didn't belong in any known human anatomy. Some skulls measured over 30 centimeters in length, but this wasn't artificial deformation. These weren't the result of head-binding rituals seen in other ancient cultures. These skulls were biologically different. Hexers and early structural analysis revealed no cranial suture lines where the skull plates typically fuse, suggesting a single solid bone structure. A cranial volume 25 to 30% larger than a normal human, and two small holes at the rear of the skull, where no human foramen should exist. Tello was stunned. He cataloged over 300 of these elongated skulls. Some still had strands of reddish hair for indigenous South American populations. As word spread, researchers and skeptics alike rushed to the scene. Theories abounded. Some claimed it was a long-lost elite race, genetically distinct and now extinct. Others whispered of ancient astronauts and non-human ancestors who once walked alongside early civilizations. But even more disturbing were the artifacts buried with the skulls. Metallic instruments of unknown function, woven textiles with spiral and star-like patterns, unmatched in local cultures, carvings of figures with oval heads and almond-shaped eyes. And then, the discovery that changed everything. A child's remains still partially mummified, with a skull already elongated at birth. This wasn't the result of ritual. This was inherited. Which raised the question: who were these people? Where did they come from? And why did they vanish completely, silently from history? Tello kept digging. But within a few years, funding dried up. Access was restricted, and the Paracas skulls were quietly moved to a private museum. For decades, they sat in obscurity, until the 2000s, when technology would finally offer a way to answer the question that haunted everyone who saw those skulls. Were they even human? For decades, the Paracas skulls were dismissed as tribal curiosities, odd, ancient, explained away by head-binding rituals, despite all the evidence to the contrary. But then came the age of DNA sequencing. In the early 2000s, researchers began testing strands of hair and bone dust extracted from several of the best-preserved skulls. And what they found would spark a firestorm in both the scientific and alternative communities. The mitochondrial DNA, the part inherited from the mother, showed no native lineages. These skulls, buried deep in the sands of Peru, carried European and Middle Eastern haplogroups. That alone shattered expectations. But it was the nuclear DNA that truly broke the model. One lab reported, there are mutations present in the Paracas samples that do not match any known human, primate, or animal genome on record. They weren't just different, they were unclassified. The bone itself was denser, the shape biomechanically illogical for a Homo sapiens skull. There were no signs of sutures or growth plates, and more disturbingly, certain markers indicated a separate ancestry entirely. The conclusions were cautious, yet chilling. If these mutations are genuine, we may be looking at a subspecies of human, or something altogether non-human. But just as quickly as the excitement peaked, doors began to close. DNA samples were confiscated. Private labs pulled out. One geneticist, who had published a tentative paper on the findings, suddenly recanted and removed his work. Rumors swirled that government agencies had stepped in, that religious institutions had quietly pressured museums, that this discovery threatened more than science, it threatened the story of who we are. And yet, the questions remain. How did people with non-American DNA appear in Paracas, Peru, centuries before Columbus? Why were their skulls so radically different in structure? And why does no indigenous lore remember them? Some believe the Paracas were hybrids, part of an ancient, forgotten lineage that predated modern man. Others say they were visitors, left behind by travelers, not of this earth. But if that were true, where are the rest? Where is their technology, their writings, their cities, or were they erased? The Paracas skulls were unlike anything else, and they didn't just belong to one or two individuals. Over 300 elongated skulls were recovered. An entire burial culture dedicated to these beings. But then, nothing. No temples. No written language. No architectural legacy. It's as if this people, this race, was scrubbed from history. And that raises the question: did they vanish? Or were they made to vanish? Some theorists believe the Paracas people were part of a hybridization program, an ancient experiment blending early humans with a more advanced, possibly non-terrestrial species, a genetic blueprint that didn't survive. Ancient texts from Sumer to Egypt speak of gods walking among men, teaching them arts, building cities only to disappear without a trace. What if those gods didn't disappear? They died. And what remained were the Paracas, not divine, but not fully human either. Their silence in the historical record might not be a coincidence. It might be intentional, because if proof existed of a separate humanoid species with greater cranial capacity, unknown DNA, and inexplicable geographic origins, then everything we know about human evolution, civilization, and identity would collapse. Control over history relies on one thing: consistency. The Paracas skulls are the ultimate inconsistency. Some researchers tried to revisit the site in the 2010s. They were denied permits. The land was bought by a private entity. Excavation rights revoked. Then came the museums. Several skulls were suddenly removed from display, marked under conservation, but insiders claimed they were confiscated. This isn't just archaeology, one whistleblower said. It's containment. Today, only a few skulls remain accessible, kept in dusty corners of private museums, far from the eyes of mainstream academia. And yet, in genetic data hidden on encrypted drives, in silent sarcophagi buried beneath Peruvian sands, in whispered accounts of long-skulled beings seen in South America long before the Incas. Maybe the Paracas people weren't a myth. Maybe they were the others. We are what came after. A second attempt. A corrected strain. Or the beginning of a much older cycle. One that's not over yet. Because if they were here once, what's stopping them from returning?